Welcome, dear listener, to Corpse at the Stone Angel Fountain, a Miss Marple murder mystery. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we journey to the quaint village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Here, amidst blooming rose gardens and gossiping villagers, our sharp-eyed sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, unravels a puzzling crime. This cozy tale of intrigue and intellect is narrated for your enjoyment, spanning 10 chapters. For easy navigation, chapter timestamps are included. Let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow over the Fountain. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, a patchwork of thatched cottages and winding lanes, where time seemed to pause, like a clock caught between ticks. It was autumn, 1952, and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, mingling with the faint sweetness of late-blooming roses. At the heart of the village green stood the stone angel fountain, a relic of some forgotten Victorian benefactor. Its marble angel, wings carved with delicate precision, gazed skyward, clutching a chalice from which clear water trickled in a soft, unending hymn. The fountain was a place of quiet reverence for the villagers, a spot for hurried proposals, whispered confidences, or simply a moment's respite on a bench beneath the ancient oaks that fringed the green. But on this particular morning, the fountain's serenity was shattered, and St. Mary Mead found itself at the center of a mystery that would stir even its sleepiest corners. Miss Jane Marple, a spinster of 74 with a mind as sharp as the knitting needles she carried in her tapestry bag, was out for her customary morning stroll. Her tweed skirt brushed the dew-kissed grass, and her sensible shoes tapped lightly on the cobbled path that circled the green. Her eyes, bright and blue behind small, wire-rimmed spectacles, took in every detail. The sparrows flitting in the hedgerows, the postman's bicycle wobbling past Mrs. Murgatroyd's gate, and the faint mist curling around the base of the fountain like a gossamer scarf. Guardian of propriety, whose ample figure was now hurrying toward the fountain, her hat askew and her hands flapping like startled birds. Miss Marple quickened her pace, curiosity prickling like a dropped stitch in her knitting. There, slumped against the fountain's marble base, was Sir Reginald Harrington, master of Harrington Manor and one of St. Mary Mead's most prominent residents. He sat unnaturally still, his head tilted back as if admiring the angel above. His face, usually stern with the weight of his 50-odd years, was pale as the marble itself, his eyes fixed in a glassy stare. A thin trickle of blood ran from his temple, staining the collar of his tweed jacket. His hands rested limply in his lap, one clutching a gold pocket watch, its chain glinting in the morning sun. The water in the fountain continued its gentle murmur, oblivious to the tragedy at its feet. Miss Marple stepped closer, her lips pursed. "Dear me," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm of someone accustomed to unraveling life's tangles. She noted the absence of any weapon, no stick, no stone, no telltale object to explain the wound. The grass around the body was undisturbed, the dew unbroken except where Sir Reginald's boots had scuffed the earth. The scene was oddly peaceful, as if death had tiptoed in and out without disturbing the village's rhythm. Mrs. Price Ridley, now fanning herself with a handkerchief, was joined by a small crowd. Mr. Hayworth, the baker, still dusted with flour. Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, clutching a bundle of letters, and young Tommy Slack, the village constable, who arrived panting on his bicycle. "Stay back, please," Tommy called, his youthful face pale as he fumbled with a length of rope to cordon off the area. His hands shook slightly, betraying his inexperience with anything more serious than a stolen bicycle or a dispute over Mrs. Murgatroyd's wandering hens. "Blunt force trauma, I'd wager," said Dr. Haydick, who had just arrived, his black medical bag swinging as he dismounted his own bicycle. The doctor, Reginald Harrington, had been a figure of both admiration and contention in St. Mary Mead. A retired Army colonel turned landowner, he had inherited Harrington Manor 20 years ago and ruled it with a firm hand. Generous with his donations to the church and village fete, he was nonetheless known for his sharp tongue and uncompromising standards. Whispers of old grudges, of tenants dismissed, debts unpaid, or family secrets buried, had long circulated in the tea rooms and pub. Miss Marple recalled a conversation at the Blue Boar Inn, where the gardener, Amos Digby, had muttered about unpaid wages, and young Victor Harrington, the colonel's nephew, had hinted at strained relations over money. "He was out here early, wasn't he?" Miss Weatherby ventured, clutching her letters tighter. "I saw him at dawn, walking toward the green. Looked troubled, if you ask me." "Dawn, you say?" Miss Marple's voice was mild, but her eyes sharpened. "Alone?" Miss Weatherby hesitated. "I think so. Though, well, it was foggy. Could have been someone else nearby, but I didn't linger." Tommy Slack, attempting authority, cleared his throat. "I'll need statements from everyone, and nobody touch anything until Inspector Slack arrives." The mention of his cousin, the detective inspector from Much Benham, brought a murmur of relief from the crowd. Inspector Slack, though brusque, was known for his efficiency, if not his patience with Miss Marple's interference. As the villagers dispersed, whispering theories, Miss Marple lingered by the fountain. She studied the angel's serene face, the chalice's faint tilt, the pool of water at the base where a single leaf floated, caught in an odd eddy. "People are so careless with their secrets," she thought, recalling a long-ago incident in the village, a stolen locket, solved by noticing a smudge on a teacup. They leave clues in the smallest things. She turned toward Rosebank, her cottage at the edge of the green, her steps deliberate, but her mind racing. Sir Reginald's death was no random act, she was certain. The absence of a weapon, the precision of the blow. Whispers in the tea room. By early afternoon, the village of St. Mary Mead had transformed into a hive of hushed voices and sidelong glances. The shocking discovery of Sir Reginald Harrington's body by the Stone Angel fountain had set tongues wagging, and the Blue Boar Inn's tea room became the inevitable gathering place for the villagers to dissect the tragedy over cups of steaming tea and warm scones. The tea room, a cozy nook tucked at the back of the inn, was a haven of chintz curtains, polished oak tables, and the faint clink of china. Its walls, adorned with faded watercolors of the countryside, seemed to absorb the murmurs of speculation, while the scent of freshly baked goods mingled with the sharp tang of gossip. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, near a window overlooking the village green. Her knitting lay in her lap, a half-finished scarf of soft gray wool, though her needles remained still as she sipped her Earl Grey. At 74, with her silver hair neatly pinned and her tweed skirt immaculate, she blended into the tea room's ambiance like a familiar piece of furniture. Yet her blue eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, missed nothing. She noted the way the sunlight slanted through the mullioned windows, casting lacy shadows on the floor, and the nervous fidgeting of the villagers as they spoke in low tones. To Miss Marple, the tea room was not just a place for refreshment, but a stage where human nature played out its little dramas, as predictable as the patterns in her knitting. The first to draw her attention was Lady Evelyn Harrington, Sir Reginald's widow, who entered the tea room with the grace of a swan gliding across a pond. Tall and elegant, her auburn hair swept into a chignon. She wore a black silk dress that spoke of mourning, but also of wealth. A string of pearls gleamed at her throat, and she clutched a lace handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her eyes as she took a seat near the fireplace. The vicar, Reverend Clement, joined her, his round face creased with sympathy. "My dear Lady Evelyn," he said, patting her hand, left faint traces of earth on the tea room's polished floor. He settled at a table near the counter, nursing a pint of ale rather than tea, his scowl deepening as he muttered to Mr. Hayworth, the baker. "Sir Reginald owed me back wages," Digby grumbled, his voice like gravel. "Threatened to sack me over them wilted roses by the fountain. Said they ruined his view. But I wouldn't harm a fly, let alone a man." Mr. Hayworth, still dusted with flour from his morning's work, nodded sagely. "Aye, he was particular, wasn't he? Always checking the manor grounds like a general inspecting troops." Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a deliberate motion. Digby's resentment was palpable, but his denial rang a touch too fervent, like the butcher's boy years ago who swore he hadn't touched the missing sausages. "Resentment festers," she mused, "especially when pride is pricked." The tea-room door swung open again, admitting Victor Harrington, Sir Reginald's nephew from London. A handsome young man in his late 20s, Victor cut a dashing figure in a tailored suit, though its cuffs were slightly frayed, betraying his financial straits. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile was charming but strained as he greeted the room. He slid into a chair near Lady Evelyn, who gave him a tight nod. "Uncle was like a father to me," Victor said to the vicar, his voice smooth but his eyes darting toward the door. "I can't believe he's gone." Miss Marple noted the nervous twitch of his fingers, drumming lightly on the table. Victor's reputation preceded him. Rumors of gambling debts had reached St. Mary Mead long before his latest visit. She recalled a similar young man in the village, years back, whose charm had masked a penchant for trouble until a stolen watch exposed him. Youth and desperation, she thought. A dangerous combination. Hovering near the counter was Dolly Finch, the young maid from Harrington Manor. Barely 20, with rosy cheeks and a nervous giggle, she moved between tables, serving tea and scones with a practiced deference. Her apron was crisp, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been perpetually worried brow. He was a fixture in St. Mary Mead, known for his sermons on forgiveness and his tendency to misplace his spectacles. Sir Reginald was a pillar of the community, he said to the room at large, his voice carrying a touch of strain. His donations kept the church roof from leaking. We shall miss him dearly. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze flitting between the players in this unfolding drama. The tea room, with its warm light and murmured conversations, was a microcosm of St. Mary Mead, where every villager carried a story, and every story held a thread of truth or deception. She thought of the village fete 5 years ago, when a missing raffle prize had led to a tangle of accusations, all unraveled by a single overheard remark. People talk so freely, she reflected, and yet say so little of what matters. As the afternoon wore on, snippets of conversation drifted to her corner. Mrs. Price Ridley, seated nearby, was holding court with Miss Weatherby and Mrs. Murgatroyd, I heard Sir Reginald was planning to change his will, Mrs. Price Ridley declared, her voice dripping with significance. Left everything to Lady Evelyn, but only if she didn't remarry. Otherwise it goes to Victor. Miss Weatherby gasped, clutching her teacup. That's motive, isn't it? For someone to, you know. Nonsense, Mrs. Murgatroyd huffed, though her eyes gleamed with curiosity. Lady Evelyn's devoted, and Victor's a gentleman, even if he's a bit wild. Miss Marple's needles paused. A will was always a potent ingredient in village mysteries, like the time old Mr. Grimsby's bequest had set his heirs at each other's throats. She made a mental note to inquire about Sir Reginald's solicitor. Across the room, Digby leaned toward Victor, his voice low but audible to Miss Marple's keen ears. You were at the fountain last night, weren't you? Saw you skulking about when I locked the shed. Victor's smile hinted at unspoken burdens. Each had a thread to pull, and Miss Marple knew from experience, such as the case of the missing silver teapot, that the smallest thread could unravel the largest secret. Stepping into the afternoon light, she glanced toward the fountain, its angel gleaming in the distance. How intriguing, she murmured, her voice lost in the breeze. Like that affair with the poisoned preserves. Motives are always hidden in plain sight. Chapter 3. Echoes from the Manor. The following morning the sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a gentle warmth, casting golden rays across the village green and gilding the Stone Angel fountain, where the memory of Sir Reginald Harrington's death lingered like a shadow. The village, though still abuzz with speculation, had settled into a quieter rhythm, as if the initial shock had given way to a collective resolve to make sense of the tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, ever observant, decided it was time to visit Harrington Manor, the grand Georgian estate that had been Sir Reginald's domain. She had received a polite invitation from Inspector Slack, Detective Inspector George Slack from Much Benham, no relation to the village constable, but equally prone to underestimating the elderly spinster's knack for unraveling mysteries. Miss Marple, with her tapestry bag slung over her arm and her sensible hat firmly in place, set out, her steps measured but her mind as alert as a hawk's. Harrington Manor stood at the edge of the village, its ivy-cloaked walls rising like a sentinel over manicured lawns and rose beds that, despite the season, still bloomed with defiant color. The manor's facade was a symphony of symmetry. Tall sash windows, a pedimented entrance, and chimneys that puffed faint wisps of smoke into the autumn sky. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the gravel drive, recently raked, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingling with the earthier notes of Mr. Digby's garden work. The manor was a place of grandeur, but also of secrets, she thought, recalling the case of the missing emerald brooch at a similar estate years ago, where a butler's polished Evelyn's hand as she poured tea. The drawing room was a study in elegance, a marble fireplace, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a portrait of Sir Reginald in his army uniform, his stern gaze seeming to follow every movement. On the mantel stood a miniature replica of the Stone Angel fountain, its tiny chalice glinting in the firelight. Reginald loved this model, Lady Evelyn said, following Miss Marple's gaze. He had it commissioned years ago. He often walked to the real fountain at dawn, said it cleared his mind. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the wool in her bag. A curious habit, those dawn walks. Did he go alone? Lady Evelyn hesitated, her pearls catching the light as she shifted. Usually, yes, though Victor sometimes joined him. They were close despite differences. Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple filed away the pause, much like she had noted the hesitation of a village girl years ago who claimed to know nothing about a stolen bicycle. Inspector Slack bustled in, his notebook in hand and his expression one of barely concealed impatience. "Miss Marple, I'm humoring the village's faith in you, but let's keep this quick," he said brusquely. "We're dealing with a murder, not a lost cat. No weapon yet, but we're searching the grounds." "Of course, Inspector," Miss Marple said mildly, though her mind was already threading together the morning's observations. She followed Lady Evelyn and the inspector on a tour of the manor, her eyes darting to corners and crevices. In the library, where Sir Reginald had spent his evenings, she noticed a desk cluttered with papers, estate accounts, letters, and a ledger with hurried annotations. A faint smudge of mud on the rug caught her attention. Too small for Mr. Digby's heavy boots, but distinct enough to suggest a recent visitor. Outside in the garden, Mr. Amos Digby was at work, his broad shoulders bent over a rosebed. His tweed cap was pulled low, and his hands, rough as tree bark, gripped a spade. When inspected, "Uncle promised to bail me out," he admitted, his voice low. "I've had troubles in London, gambling mostly. We met at the fountain last night. He refused to help. Said I needed to learn my lesson." His eyes darted to Lady Evelyn, who stood stiffly by the window. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a deliberate sound. Victor's confession was candid, but his nervous energy suggested more than financial woes. She recalled a young man in the village years back whose gambling debts had led to a desperate theft, caught when his muddy boots matched a trail to the crime. Dolly Finch, the young maid, was polishing silver in the dining room when Miss Marple passed by. A spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor, and her cheeks flushed as she stooped to retrieve it. "Oh, Miss Marple, you startled me," she said, her voice high. I saw someone lurking by the fountain after dark last night. A tall shadow, like a man. Couldn't see who." Miss Marple's expression was kind but probing. "How distressing, Dolly. Did you tell Sir Reginald?" Dolly shook her head, her curls bouncing. "No, miss. I was afraid he'd think I was shirking my duties being out so late." Her hands twisted in her apron, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremble, like that of a girl caught sneaking sweets from the vicarage pantry. Reverend Clement arrived shortly after, his bicycle propped against the manor's wall. He carried a leather-bound Bible and a worried frown. "I came to offer condolences," he said, his voice gentle but strained. "Sir Reginald confided in me recently about a family secret, but it's confidential, of course." He glanced at Lady Evelyn, who turned away, her lips tightening. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the Reverend's hands, which clutched the Bible a touch too tightly. "A secret, you say," she murmured. "How heavy such burdens can be." She thought of the vicarage scandal years ago, when a confidential confession had unraveled a web of deceit. As the tour concluded, Miss Marple paused by the mantel, studying Rosebank, her cottage at the edge of the green. Miss Marple's mind wove the morning's observations into a delicate tapestry. Lady Evelyn's guarded poise, Digby's defensive bluster, Victor's desperation, Dolly's flustered confession, and the Reverend's vague secret. All were threads in a pattern not yet clear. The manor, Like St. Mary Mead itself was a place of appearances, and Miss Marple knew from experience that appearances were the first to deceive. She thought of the fountain, its angel standing sentinel over a crime that was both precise and perplexing. People are so careless with their truths, she mused, her fingers itching to pick up her knitting. But truths, like stitches, always come to light. Chapter 4. The Misplaced Chalice. The days following Sir Reginald Harrington's death draped St. Mary Mead in a quiet unease, like a fog that lingered past dawn. The village green, usually alive with children playing or villagers exchanging pleasantries, seemed subdued. The Stone Angel fountain now a somber landmark rather than a place of repose. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the chill in the air or the weight of the mystery, continued her gentle probing, her mind as nimble as her fingers at her knitting. By the fourth day, the village was rife with theories, each more fanciful than the last, and Miss Marple knew that truth often hid behind such chatter, like a pearl in an oyster's rough shell. She resolved to revisit the fountain, sensing that its silent presence held more answers than the villagers' whispers. The morning was crisp, with a breeze that carried the scent of damp leaves and the faint tang of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Miss Marple, clad in her tweed coat and a scarf of soft lavender wool, walked the cobbled path to the green, her tapestry bag swinging lightly at her side. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, scanned the familiar landscape. The post office with its sagging awning, the Blue Boar Inn sign creaking in the wind, and the fountain itself, its marble angel gleaming under a weak sun. The chalice and stitch in her knitting. Her reverie was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Tommy Slack, his bicycle wobbling as he dismounted. "Miss Marple, you shouldn't be here," he said, his youthful face flushed with exertion. "Inspector's orders, this is a crime scene." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Of course, Tommy. I was merely admiring the fountain. Such a lovely piece, don't you think? Though the chalice seems out of place." Tommy frowned, glancing at the angel. "Out of place? Looks fine to me. But we've got bigger problems. Found a spade in Mr. Digby's shed with blood on it. Inspector's hauling him in now." "Blood, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her eyes sharpened. "How intriguing. And where is this spade?" Tommy hesitated, then gestured toward the village hall, where Inspector Slack's car was parked. "Locked up safe. But don't you go meddling, Miss Marple. Inspector's in a state." As Tommy pedaled off, Miss Marple made her way to the village hall. Her curiosity piqued. Inside, Inspector Slack stood over a table examining a heavy iron spade, its blade stained with a dark, reddish smear. Mr. Amos Digby, his burly frame tense, sat nearby, his tweed cap crumpled in his hands. "It's not blood," Digby protested, his voice rough. "It's paint. Red paint from pruning the roses. I told you, I was home that morning." Inspector Slack, his face a mask of skepticism, scribbled in his notebook. "Paint, you say? We'll have it tested. But a spade like this could have done the job. Clean blow to the temple." Miss Marple, standing quietly by the door, tilted her head. "May I see, Inspector?" she asked, her voice deferential but firm. Slack sighed but waved her over. She peered at the spade, noting the smear's glossy texture, unlike the dull crust of dried blood. "Indeed," "It does look like paint," she said. "Mr. Digby, you use this for your roses." "Aye," Digby muttered. That made her giggle nervously. Reverend Clement, meanwhile, blessed the fete with a prayer, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke of community and healing. Miss Marple, seated on a bench with a cup of tea, observed the scene like a painter studying a canvas. The fete was a microcosm of St. Mary Mead, where alliances and animosities played out in glances and gestures. She recalled a similar fete years ago, when a stolen prize marrow had revealed a feud among neighbors. People reveal themselves in crowds, she thought, her needles clicking softly in her lap. A new piece of gossip reached her ears, carried by Mrs. Price Ridley, who was holding court near the cake stall. "I heard from the solicitor's clerk," she said, her voice low but eager. "Sir Reginald's will leaves everything to Lady Evelyn, unless she remarries. Then it goes to Victor. Imagine that." Mrs. Murgatroyd, her friend, gasped. "That's a motive, isn't it? For Victor, perhaps? Or Lady Evelyn," Miss Weatherby added, her eyes gleaming. "She's still young, might want to marry again." Miss Marple's lips twitched. A will was a classic thread in any mystery, like the one that had unraveled the case of old Mrs. Grimsby's missing pearls. But she sensed more to this than inheritance. She rose, her scarf fluttering, and approached the fountain once more, this time under the guise of admiring the fete's floral displays nearby. The chalice's tilt was unmistakable now, and she noticed a faint seam in the marble, barely visible unless one stood close. She reached out, her fingers grazing the edge, but stopped when she heard footsteps. "Miss Marple, you're awfully curious about that fountain," Victor said, his tone light, but his eyes wary. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his suit jacket flapping in the breeze. "It's a beautiful piece," she replied, her voice serene. "Do you know much about its history, Mr. Harrington?" Victor shrugged. "Uncle was proud of it, said it had been in the knitting. Like that affair with the poisoned jam. Everyone pointed fingers, but the truth was in the details." She gazed out her window, where the fountain stood in the distance, its angel a silent sentinel. The mystery was deepening, and Miss Marple knew that the smallest clue, perhaps a scratch, a ripple, or a whispered word, would lead her closer to the truth. For now, she knitted, her needles clicking like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the moment the pattern would reveal itself. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Vicarage. The mystery surrounding Sir Reginald Harrington's death had woven itself into the fabric of St. Mary Mead, like a dark thread in a familiar tapestry. By the 5th day, the village's initial shock had settled into a restless curiosity, with every teacup conversation and chance encounter at the post office tinged with speculation. Miss Jane Marple, her mind as sharp as the needles that clicked in her hands, sensed that the truth lay not in the clamor of village gossip, but in the quiet corners where secrets lingered. Determined to unravel another layer of the puzzle, she accepted an invitation for tea at the vicarage with Reverend Clement, whose anxious demeanor at the fete had piqued her interest. As she walked the winding lane to the vicarage, her lavender scarf fluttering in the autumn breeze, she mused that human nature, like her knitting, often revealed its patterns in the subtlest stitches. The vicarage was a rambling, ivy-draped house at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its garden a tangle of late roses and overgrown laurels. The air carried the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle clinging to the season. Miss Marple knocked gently on the oak door, her tapestry bag slung over her arm, and was greeted by Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, whose cheerful bustle masked a nervous glance toward the study. "Miss Marple, how lovely," Mrs. Clement said, ushering her inside. "Leonard's been so distracted since, well, you know. Tea's in the parlor." The parlor was a cozy room, its walls lined with bookshelves, sagging under theological tomes and novels, the latter betrayed away, like a stitch held for later. "You were close to Sir Reginald," she said, her tone gentle. "He valued your counsel, I believe." Reverend Clement nodded, his fingers fidgeting with a teaspoon. "Indeed, he was a generous benefactor to the church. But, well, we had a disagreement recently. He suspected some irregularities in the church investments. Utter nonsense, of course." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush creeping up his neck, reminiscent of a choir boy caught pilfering from the collection plate years ago. "Suspicions can be so distressing," she said, sipping her tea. "Did he share any details?" The vicar hesitated, his eyes darting to the paperweight. "Only vaguely. He mentioned a family matter, something about Victor. But it was confidential, you understand." He adjusted his spectacles, a nervous tic Miss Marple had seen in others hiding half-truths. As they spoke, Mrs. Clement bustled in with a plate of scones, her chatter about the upcoming harvest festival a thin veil over her unease. Miss Marple's mind drifted to the fountain, its tilted chalice and swirling water. The vicar's mention of a family matter echoed Dolly's tale of a shadowy figure and Victor's admission of a late-night meeting with his uncle. People are so careless with their secrets, she thought. Like that affair with the missing parish silver, always a telltale sign. Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple took a detour through the village, her steps leading her past the Blue Boar Inn, where she spotted Dolly Finch hurrying from the back door, her apron askew. The young maid's cheeks were flushed, her eyes darting as if expecting pursuit. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Dolly, dear, you seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Dolly started, clutching her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's nothing. Well, I've been jumpy since the master's death." She lowered her voice, glancing around. "Lady Evelyn slapped me once, you know. Thought I was eyeing Sir Reginald. Pure nonsense, but she's got a temper." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. That must have been upsetting." "Deliberate." "Mr. Digby," she called, her voice soft but clear. "I hear you and Mr. Victor had words." Digby's spade paused mid-air, his scowl deepening. "Aye, he's been pestering me for cash. Thinks I'm flush from working at the manor. Told him to shove off." He resumed his work, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his shoulders, like a farmer caught selling spoiled milk years ago. Inspector Slack, meanwhile, pursued the argument as a lead, hauling Victor in for questioning. But Victor's alibi, that he was at the Blue Boar Inn until midnight, confirmed by the barman, held firm, and the trail fizzled. Miss Marple, knitting in her garden that evening, reflected on the day's findings. The vicar's unease, Dolly's revelation, Victor's quarrel, and Digby's defensiveness were all threads, but none yet formed a clear pattern. She thought of the fountain's chalice, its odd tilt suggesting a mechanism, perhaps a clue to the murder's method. "Like that case of the poisoned preserves," she murmured, her needles clicking. "Everyone pointed fingers, but the truth was in the jar's seal." The village settled into dusk, the church bell tolling 6, its notes mingling with the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple gazed toward the fountain, its silhouette stark against the fading light. The angel's chalice, she sensed, was more than a decorative flourish. It was a key, though to what lock she could not yet say. Lady Evelyn's temper, Victor's debts, Digby's resentment, Dolly's fear, and the vicar's secret formed a web. And Miss Marple knew from experience, such as the affair of the stolen hymnals, that the truth often lay where the threads crossed. She picked up her knitting, her fingers moving with quiet purpose, each stitch a step closer to unraveling the mystery of the Stone Angel Fountain. Chapter 6. The Forgotten Letter. The mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's death had settled over St. Mary Mead like a persistent mist, seeping into every conversation and casting long shadows across the villages, ostensibly to help catalog his charitable contributions for the church. But Miss Marple suspected Lady Evelyn's invitation was less about charity and more about keeping an eye on the village's resident sleuth. The drawing room, with its heavy drapes and polished mahogany, was as elegant as ever, but an air of tension hung about it, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam. Lady Evelyn, dressed in mourning black with a single pearl brooch, greeted Miss Marple with a strained smile. "You're so kind to help, Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth but her eyes flickering with unease. "Reginald's papers are in such disarray." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her tapestry bag at her feet, and surveyed the room. On the desk lay a pile of documents, ledgers, letters, and estate records. Among them she spotted a single sheet of paper, its edges crumpled, tucked beneath a heavy inkstand. As Lady Evelyn turned to pour tea, Miss Marple deftly lifted the inkstand and retrieved the letter. It was written in a hurried scrawl, unsigned, and its contents sent a shiver through her. "Reginald, your wife's heart strays to the vicarage. End it, or all will know." The accusation of an affair between Lady Evelyn and Reverend Clement was stark, and Miss Marple's mind flashed to the vicar's nervous demeanor, his vague mention of a family secret. "Dear me," Miss Marple murmured, slipping the letter back before Lady Evelyn turned. "Such a curious find." She thought of a similar anonymous note from years ago, accusing a village schoolteacher of theft, which had unraveled a web of jealousy rather than truth. "Anonymous letters are so unkind," she said aloud, her tone mild. "They stir trouble without proof." Lady Evelyn's hand froze mid-pour, her teacup clattering slightly. "Letters. Oh, Reginald receives such nonsense sometimes. People can be so cruel." Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted to the desk, and Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up her neck, like that of a girl caught whispering in church. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Amos Digby, who stomped in, meeting with his uncle at the fountain. Could the glove have been dropped then, or planted later? People are so quick to point fingers, she thought, her fingers brushing the wool in her bag. Later that day, Miss Marple joined Inspector Slack at the village hall, where he was examining the glove. "Victor's, no doubt," Slack said, his voice gruff. "Monogram matches, but he swears it was stolen from his room at the manor." The inspector's frustration was palpable, and Miss Marple sympathized, recalling his exasperation during the case of the missing church candlesticks, when every clue seemed to lead nowhere. She returned to the fountain that afternoon, drawn by its quiet enigma. The angel's chalice, still tilted, caught her eye, and she leaned closer, noting a faint seam in the marble, as if the chalice could be twisted or opened. The water's swirl, she observed, was uneven, suggesting a hidden compartment or mechanism. Her mind raced to the miniature fountain in the manor, its chalice similarly askew. Could it hold something? She wondered. Poison, perhaps? She recalled Dr. Haydock's initial diagnosis of blunt force trauma, but a nagging thought persisted. Could the wound have been a disguise for something subtler? Her suspicions were confirmed that evening when Dr. Haydock, cycling past Rosebank, stopped to share news. "Miss Marple, we've had a development," he said, his face grim. "The wound on Sir Reginald's temple. It wasn't just a blow. Traces of poison were found in the blood. A clever disguise making it look like blunt force. Whoever did this knew their chemistry." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. "Poison, you say? How extraordinary." She thought of the garden shed where Digby kept pesticides, accessible to anyone at the manor. "Like that affair with the poisoned preserves," she murmured. The method was in the details. As dusk fell, the village buzzed with fresh gossip. Mrs. Price Ridley, holding court at the post office, declared the glove proof of Victor's guilt. "He's desperate for money," she said, "and that will, mark my words, he wanted it." What the fountain's chalice, with its hidden seam, nagged at her. She rose, crossing to her window, where the fountain's silhouette loomed against the twilight. A compartment, perhaps, she mused, her needles pausing, like the secret drawer in Aunt Clara's desk, hiding a letter that solved a theft. The poison suggested a plan more intricate than a simple blow, and Miss Marple suspected the chalice held the answer, perhaps a mechanism to deliver a fatal dose. But who knew of it? The manor's residents, certainly, and perhaps the vicar, who had borrowed the miniature for a sermon. As the church bell tolled 7, its notes mingling with the rustle of leaves, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her fingers moving with quiet purpose. The letter, the glove, the poison, all were threads in a tapestry growing clearer. Lady Evelyn's denial, Victor's stolen glove, Digby's convenient find, Dolly's fear, and the vicar's secret formed a web, but the center remained elusive. "People are so careless with their truths," she murmured, her needles clicking like a metronome. But truths, like stitches, always come to light. Chapter 7. Threads Unraveling. The mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's death had tightened its grip on St. Mary Mead, weaving a web of suspicion that entangled every villager, from the postmistress to the publican. By the 7th day, the village green, with its stone angel fountain at its heart, seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets, its marble angel gazing impassively over a community restless for answers. Miss Jane Marple, her mind as sharp as the needles that danced in her hands, felt the threads of the case beginning to align, like a knitting pattern emerging from a tangle of yarn. The clues, scattered across conversations, glances, and overlooked details, were coalescing, and she sensed that the truth was closer than ever. As she sat in her garden at Rosebank, her lavender scarf draped over her shoulders, she reflected on how human nature, like her knitting, revealed its truths through patience and precision. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the fountain, visible. Marple's eyes returned to the rug, where the footprint had been, now brushed away by diligent housekeeping. "Lady Evelyn," she said, her voice gentle, "I wonder if you've noticed any unusual visitors lately. Footprints, perhaps, in unexpected places." Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened on her pearl brooch. "Footprints? The servants are always tracking in mud, despite my instructions. Why do you ask?" Her tone was sharp, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. like that of a village matron caught fibbing about a recipe years ago. Before Miss Marple could press further, Dolly Finch entered, carrying a tray of tea things. Her hands trembled slightly, and her cheeks flushed as she set the tray down, a saucer clattering. Miss Marple's gaze fell on Dolly's shoes, small, practical, and faintly dusted with earth. "Dolly, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "You were at the fountain the morning Sir Reginald was found, weren't you? Your duties take you there often." Dolly's eyes widened, her curls bobbing as she shook her head. "No, miss. I pass by sometimes, but I was in the kitchen that morning. Cook can vouch for me." Her voice was high, and Miss Marple recalled a similar nervousness in a maid who had once hidden a stolen brooch, her alibi too quick to be entirely convincing. Leaving the manor, Miss Marple sought out Victor Harrington, whom she found at the Blue Boar Inn, nursing a pint in a quiet corner. His suit was rumpled, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Mr. Harrington," she said, settling across from him, "you mentioned Sir Reginald refused to help with your debts. Did he know the extent of them?" Victor's fingers drummed on the table, his charm faltering. "He knew enough," he admitted, his voice low. "I told him at the fountain that night. Begged, really. He said I was a disgrace to the family name." His eyes met hers, then dropped. "But I didn't kill him, Miss Marple. I swear it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind but probing. "Of course, dear. But debts can make people desperate." Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. And the pesticide? It's kept locked, I presume?" Digby nodded. "Always. Though the shed's not Fort Knox, someone could have slipped in." His admission was grudging, and Miss Marple thought of a farmer who had once blamed a fox for missing chickens, only to be caught selling them himself. That afternoon, a chance encounter with Reverend Clement at the church provided another thread. The vicar, polishing the altar candlesticks, looked weary, his spectacles slipping as he worked. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice heavy, "I've been troubled since our last talk. Sir Reginald's secret. It's not my place to share, but it weighs on me." Miss Marple's tone was gentle. "Secrets can be such a burden, Reverend. Perhaps a hint might ease it?" He sighed, his hands trembling. "It was about Victor. Sir Reginald confided that his war injury left him sterile. Victor isn't his blood nephew, adopted in a way, through his sister's marriage. He worried Victor's recklessness stemmed from knowing he wasn't true kin." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. "How enlightening," she said, her mind racing. A family secret explained Victor's desperation, perhaps even his presence at the fountain. She recalled a similar case, where a disputed inheritance had led to a theft, the truth buried in a family Bible's annotations. The day's revelations reached a climax when Lady Evelyn, visiting the vicarage to discuss the church fund, fainted upon hearing of the secret from Mrs. Clement, who had overheard her husband. "It's not true," Lady Evelyn gasped, clutching the vicar's armchair. "Reginald never told me." Her distress seemed genuine, but Miss Marple noted the theatricality, like a village actress overplaying her role in a local play. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her fire at Rosebank, her knitting a steady rhythm against the crackle of logs. The footprint matched Dolly's shoes, but her alibi held for now. Victor's admission of begging Sir Reginald, Digby's confession of planting the resumed her knitting, each stitch a step closer to unraveling the mystery of the Stone Angel fountain. Chapter 8. The Angel's Secret. The mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's death had cast a long shadow over St. Mary Mead, transforming the village's gentle rhythms into a quiet symphony of suspicion. By the 8th day, the Stone Angel Fountain, once a place of solace, stood as a silent witness to a crime that refused to yield its secrets easily. Miss Jane Marple, her mind as keen as the needles that clicked in her hands, felt the threads of the case tightening, like a scarf nearing completion on her knitting. The clues, the tilted chalice, the poisoned wound, the anonymous letter, the monogrammed glove, and the muddy footprint were beginning to form a pattern, and she sensed the truth was within reach. Determined to test a theory that had taken root, she decided to revisit the fountain under the cover of moonlight, when shadows might reveal what daylight concealed. As she stepped out from Rosebank, her lavender scarf tucked against the evening chill, she mused that human nature, like her knitting, often hid its most crucial stitches in the quietest moments. The village green was bathed in silver light, the moon casting the angel's marble wings in sharp relief. The fountain's water trickled softly, its murmur a counterpoint to the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Marple approached with care, her sensible shoes silent on the dew-damp grass. She paused by the fountain's base, where Sir Reginald had been found, and studied the chalice above. Its tilt, more pronounced in the moonlight, suggested a mechanism, not unlike the hidden spring in her aunt's jewelry box that had once concealed a stolen cameo. With a gloved hand, she reached up, her fingers grazing the chalice's edge. To her surprise, it shifted slightly, a faint click echoing in the still night. A small compartment, cunningly carved into the marble, sprang open, revealing a hollow just large enough to hold a vial or syringe. It was empty now, but Miss Marple's heart quickened. Knelt, her fingers brushing the base where Sir Reginald had fallen. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Dolly, dear," she called softly, stepping forward. "What brings you here so late?" Dolly gasped, nearly toppling into the fountain. "Oh, Miss Marple, I saw Lady Evelyn here at dawn the day it happened. Thought I'd check if she dropped something." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the lie, as obvious as a dropped stitch. Dolly's presence at the fountain, combined with the muddy footprint matching her shoes, painted a suspicious picture. "Dawn, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle but probing. "That's early for a stroll. Did you see anyone else?" Dolly shook her head, her curls bobbing. "No, miss. Just her. I shouldn't have said anything." She fled into the night, leaving Miss Marple to ponder. Lady Evelyn at the fountain at dawn? It contradicted her claim of being abed when Sir Reginald was found. But Dolly's nervousness suggested more than a chance sighting. The next morning, Miss Marple returned to Harrington Manor, determined to examine the miniature fountain. Lady Evelyn, pale and composed, allowed her into the drawing room, though her eyes followed Miss Marple's every move. The miniature, perched on the mantel, was a perfect replica, its chalice tilted just like its larger counterpart. "May I?" Miss Marple asked, her fingers hovering over the model. Lady Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "It's delicate, she warned, echoing her earlier caution. Miss Marple gently twisted the chalice, and a similar click revealed a tiny compartment, empty but identical in design. "How fascinating," Miss Marple said, her voice serene. "Did Sir Reginald often show this feature to guests?" Lady Evelyn's lips tightened. "Never. It was a family secret, passed down through generations. Reginald was proud of it, but private." Marple recalled a similar unease in a curate who had once concealed a stolen collection plate. Back at Rosebank, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting a steady rhythm against the crackle of logs. The chalice's hidden compartment, the poison from the shed, Dolly's sighting of Lady Evelyn, and the vicar's access to the miniature formed a clearer pattern. The murder weapon was the fountain itself, its spike laced with poison, triggered when Sir Reginald, as was his habit, adjusted the chalice during his dawn walk. But who had set the trap? Lady Evelyn, with her strained composure and knowledge of the mechanism. Victor, desperate for the inheritance. Dolly, fearful of exposure for her thefts. Or the vicar, burdened by a secret he wouldn't share. She thought of the anonymous letter accusing Lady Evelyn of an affair, a distraction that pointed to someone intimate with the manor's dynamics. The glove, monogrammed and found by Digby, felt staged, like the planted evidence in the case of the stolen village clock. Digby's access to the pesticide was too obvious, his resentment too overt. Dolly's footprint and late-night visit suggested guilt, but her fear seemed genuine. The vicar's unease and access to the miniature hinted at involvement, yet his gentle nature made murder seem unlikely. Miss Marple gazed out her window where the fountain's silhouette loomed against the starry sky. "The chalice is the key," she murmured, her needles pausing. "Like the hidden latch in old Mrs. Grimsby's wardrobe, revealing a thief." The poison required cunning, the mechanism knowledge, and the motive something deeper than greed or resentment. She recalled Victor's non-blood tie, Lady Evelyn's temper, Dolly's fear, and the vicar's secret, each a thread in a tapestry nearing completion. As the church bell tolled 9, its notes mingling with the rustle of leaves, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, each stitch a step closer to the truth. Much like the final stitches that complete a scarf. As she arranged for the meeting at Harrington Manor, her lavender scarf tucked against the autumn chill, Miss Marple mused that human nature, like her knitting, always revealed its flaws when pressed. The manor's drawing room was a fitting stage for the denouement, its heavy drapes drawn to filter the late afternoon light, casting a somber glow over the polished mahogany and leather-bound books. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of beeswax polish mingling with the faint lavender of Lady Evelyn's perfume. Miss Marple had requested the presence of all key players: Lady Evelyn Harrington, Victor Harrington, Mr. Amos Digby, Dolly Finch, and Reverend Clement, under the pretext of discussing Sir Reginald's charitable legacy. Inspector Slack, though skeptical of her methods, stood by the fireplace, his notebook at the ready, his expression a mix of impatience and curiosity. The villagers, seated in a semicircle of chintz armchairs, eyed each other warily, their faces a gallery of guarded emotions. Miss Marple stood near the mantel, her slight figure commanding the room with quiet authority. The miniature fountain, its chalice tilted like its larger counterpart, gleamed behind her, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice gentle but firm, like a teacher addressing a wayward class. "Sir Reginald's death has troubled us all, and I believe the truth lies here, among us. The fountain, you see, was not merely the scene of the crime. It was the weapon." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Evelyn's hand tightened on her pearl brooch. Victor's fingers drummed nervously. Digby's scowl deepened. Dolly's cheeks flushed, and the vicar adjusted his spectacles, his face pale. Inspector Slack raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing Miss Marple to continue. "The angel's chalice," she said, gesturing to the miniature, "conceals a compartment, as does the fountain on the green. A poisoned spike, laced with pesticide from Manor's rug, placed her near the scene." Lady Evelyn's voice was icy. "This is absurd, Miss Marple. I loved my husband. That letter was vicious gossip." The vicar nodded vigorously. "I assure you there was no affair. Sir Reginald confided in me about Victor's lineage, nothing more." Digby grunted, his hands clenched. "I told you, that paint was from my shed. Someone's framing me." Dolly's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't at the fountain, miss. I was in the kitchen." Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing the protests. "Each clue, taken alone, points to one of you. But together, they tell a different story. The letter was a distraction, meant to cast suspicion on Lady Evelyn. The glove, too conveniently found, was likely planted. The spade was a clumsy attempt to shift blame. And the footprint. Yes, Dolly, it matches your shoes, but your alibi holds. These are red herrings, like those in the affair of the stolen church silver, designed to obscure the truth." She paused, her gaze settling on Dolly, whose hands twisted in her apron. "Dolly, dear, you were at the fountain that morning, weren't you? Not at dawn, but later, when you left the footprint. You knew Sir Reginald's habits, his daily adjustment of the chalice. You also knew of the compartment, having overheard talk of the family's secret while serving tea." Dolly's face crumpled, a sob escaping her. "No, miss, I didn't." Miss Marple's voice remained gentle but unrelenting. "Sir Reginald caught you taking from the petty cash, didn't he? And there was more. Your feelings for Victor, perhaps an affair. He threatened to expose you both, didn't he? You learned of the chalice's mechanism from eavesdropping, and with access to the shed's pesticide, you laced the spike, knowing Sir Reginald's touch would trigger it." Victor leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "That's nonsense. Dolly would never—" But Dolly's sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face. "I didn't mean to kill him," she cried, her voice breaking. "He was going to ruin us. Victor—" "Marple, you've done it again. Dolly Finch, you're under arrest." He signaled to Constable Tommy Slack, who had slipped into the room to take Dolly gently by the arm. Her sobs echoed as she was led away, the villagers watching in stunned silence. Miss Marple turned to the miniature fountain, her fingers grazing its chalice. "The angel's secret," she said softly, "was a mechanism of death known only to those closest to it. Dolly's desperation, fueled by love and fear, turned it into a weapon." She thought of the many cases she had unraveled, the stolen locket, the poisoned preserves, the missing silver, each driven by human frailty. As the group dispersed, Lady Evelyn's composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Victor sat motionless, his dreams of inheritance shattered. Digby muttered about clearing his name, and the vicar offered a quiet prayer. Miss Marple stepped into the manor's garden, the evening air cool against her face. The fountain loomed in the distance, its angel serene yet unyielding. "People are so careless with their hearts," she murmured, her needles idle in her bag. "But hearts, like secrets, always reveal themselves in time." Chapter 10. The Calm After the Storm. The storm of suspicion that had gripped St. Mary Mead for 9 days broke with Dolly Finch's confession, leaving the village in a state of quiet reckoning. The Stone Angel Fountain, once the heart of a mystery, stood serene again on the green, its marble angel gazing skyward as if absolved of the secrets it had held. Miss Jane Marple, her mind as steady as the needles that now lay idle in her tapestry bag, felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, though tinged with the familiar sorrow of human frailty laid bare. The 10th day dawned with a soft clarity, the autumn sun casting golden light across the cobbled lanes, and Miss Marple resolved to tie up the final threads of the case, ensuring no loose ends remained. As she walked from Rosebank, her lavender scarf fluttering in the gentle breeze, she reflected that human nature, like her knitting, always left a few stray strands to letter about her and the vicar. Such a scandal. Mrs. Murgatroyd huffed. Nonsense, it was all Dolly's doing. A maid of all people, tampering with that fountain. Miss Marple's lips twitched, her knitting untouched in her lap. The villagers' theories, though muddled, were not entirely wrong. Dolly's confession had clarified the method, a poisoned spike in the fountain's hidden compartment. But the motives and misdirections required a final reckoning. She rose, her steps leading her to Harrington Manor, where loose ends awaited. Lady Evelyn received her in the drawing-room, her black silk dress now softened by a grey shawl, as if mourning were giving way to resignation. The miniature fountain still stood on the mantel, its chalice no longer a secret. "Miss Marple," Lady Evelyn said, her voice steady but weary, "you've done us a service, though a painful one. Dolly's confession. I never suspected her capable of such a thing." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her tapestry bag at her feet. "Desperation can drive even the gentlest soul to dark acts," she said, her tone gentle. "But I wonder, Lady Evelyn, about that anonymous letter. It was meant to mislead, to cast suspicion on you and the vicar. Did you ever suspect who wrote it?" Lady Evelyn's hand tightened on her shawl, her eyes flickering. "I assumed it was village spite. People gossip, you know. But now, I wonder if Dolly wrote it, to distract from her own guilt." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "A possibility, though it suggests someone with intimate knowledge of the manor's tensions. You and Sir Reginald argued about investments, you said. Did he suspect anyone else of disloyalty?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, then sighed. "He was paranoid about Victor's debts. Thought he might be scheming. And Dolly, he caught her stealing, as you know." "Was the garden shed?" where Mr. Amos Digby was stacking tools, his movements deliberate, but his scowl softened by relief. "Miss Marple," he grunted. "Heard they got the girl. Clears my name at least." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her eyes lingering on the pesticide tin, now secured in a locked cabinet. "Your spade caused quite a stir, Mr. Digby. Did you ever think someone might have used your tools to shift blame?" Digby's eyes narrowed. "Reckoned it was Victor, smearing paint to make me look bad. But that girl had access to the shed same as me. Sneaky she was." His tone held a grudging respect, and Miss Marple recalled a farmer who had underestimated a rival, only to be outwitted. Finally, she visited the vicarage where Reverend Clement was drafting a sermon, his spectacles slipping as he wrote. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "your insight has brought peace, though a heavy one. Dolly's confession. It's a tragedy." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze falling on the angel wing paperweight, now returned to its place on the desk. "You mentioned Sir Reginald's secret about Victor's lineage. Did you ever share it with anyone, perhaps unwittingly?" The vicar flushed, his hands trembling. "I may have mentioned it to Mrs. Clement, in confidence. She's prone to chatter, I'm afraid. Could that have reached Dolly?" His distress was genuine, and Miss Marple thought of a curate who had once let slip a secret, sparking a village feud. Back at Rosebank, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the crackle of logs a soothing counterpoint to her thoughts. The anonymous letter, she concluded, was indeed Dolly's work, crafted to deflect suspicion toward Lady Evelyn and the vicar. The glove, stolen from Victor's room, was another of her misdirections, as was the paint on Digby's spade. The muddy footprint, left in her panic after setting the trap, had betrayed her. The poison, taken from the shed, was a desperate act, fueled by her love for Victor and fear of Sir Reginald's wrath. The chalice's mechanism, her eyes on the stars beyond her window. But choices, like stitches, always leave a trace.